We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
Давайте, и дастся вам.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity. I'm your host, Shannon Cassidy. This podcast celebrates generosity at work, not financial giving valuable time, mutual respect, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Amy Volas, a sales fanatic turned entrepreneur bitten by the startup bug many moons ago. She founded Avenue Talent Partners, ATP, after $100 million in revenue sold and 2 successful exits to help early stage startups make confident hiring decisions. She is a limited partner at Stage 2 Capital, advises founders, and Amy is writing a book about the most common pitfalls in early stage startups. She focuses on executive search for startups, helping early stage founders with the challenges of hiring. Off duty, she combines her love of nature with a quirky fascination for Windex. Got to hear more about that. What I appreciate most about you, Amy, is your contagious thoughtfulness. Thankful to Liz Christo, R.O.G episode 175, for connecting us. Welcome to R.O.G, Amy.
Thank you so much. Anything that Liz asked me to do, I blindly say yes to, and I am delighted to be here. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yes, me too. Well, I want to hear more about your background. And if you don't cover it in there about the Windex, I'll come to that. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So I will start with the Windex because I have not talked about it in this way before. So I have an obsession with it figuratively and literally. So a big thing that I think is the missing piece for all of our problems is a word called alignment and another word called clarity. And when I think about Windex, so I'm in a room, my office is a 3-wall and then an open door behind me with windows. So I'm surrounded by windows. And I have a thing with birds and I'm obsessed with them. And I look out my front window here and there are 4 different bird feeders. So we've had weird weather here in the Midwest. And if you are surrounded by windows and there is a storm of any sort, your windows have these little watermarks all over them, or sometimes dirty watermarks over them. I can't see the same way if it's not Windex clear. The same thing from a figurative perspective. If we're not clear about what we're here to do, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, who we do it with best for all of those things, if we're not clear, how can anyone or anything else around us be clear? So that is my Windex obsession. So my background is sales specifically. I was thrown into the deep end of sales when I survived my first recession in 2001, enterprise sales. I go all the way back to the old school of full cycle. That is what I did really well as an individual contributor selling products and services. I was then promoted into leadership. Then I fell into startups. I have started 3 companies. The 2 exits were part of my startup career. And I spent a bunch of time in and around the HR tech landscape selling products and services. And so I noticed this thing about people problems. So for me, one of my superpowers is recognizing patterns and themes. And I realized that especially in tech startups, hiring people like me, so a sales leader or somebody in CS or any sort of go-to-market function, there was way more turnover there than there was anywhere else. And so these are all problems that I care deeply about, that I'm turned way on by. And in 2015, I started Avenue Talent Partners to take all of those lessons. And if I don't like what's happening with something, instead of talking about it, I try to do something about it. Recruiting is just as broken as sales. And so here I am owning an executive search firm for executive sales and CS leaders for startups. So that is my long drawn out Windex riddled story of giving you way more context than you wanted or needed.
Not even close. I actually have one more follow-up question about your childhood. But what just on CS, if you could, for our listeners who are not familiar with that acronym.
Yes, customer success. So after the sale, taking care of your customer. And like I said, when I was coming up through the ranks, full cycle was you were everything. You were your own SDR, which is a sales development rep. You were your own researcher. You were your own solutions consultant. You were your own seller, post-seller account manager, customer success, all of that. And that was a masterclass that I'm so grateful that I've had. But I say CS now because we have segmented out the function of go-to-market. So customer success.
Thank you. That really helps. So you lived in Italy for a stint in your childhood. Would love to hear about that.
I did. So my parents got divorced when I was young, and my mother fell in love with a man in the military and married him, and off to all sorts of different places we went. Italy was the first one, and I am half Italian. And my mother is very much the kind of person that felt like if we are going to live here, we're not going to live on base. We're going to live like we're Italian. And it was the coolest thing. I also was involved in a European swim league where every other weekend we would stay with the host family. So the team that we were competing against, you'd stay with them in their home in a different country. And I mean, I was young at Oktoberfest in Germany. And I mean, I just think about all these things, and it was really one of the highlight moments of my childhood in my formative years of living in a different country, traveling to lots of different countries, and understanding that the world is a whole lot bigger than we give ourselves credit for with the little speck that we occupy on the globe. So it was awesome.
Oh, that's incredible. What a worldly experience, and so unique for you to be not just visiting those parts of the world, but staying in homes and, getting to learn about the families and the culture. So that's so interesting. So here you are trying to help founders with some of their biggest problems, which is, number one, hiring. So what are some of the things that you have noticed are really effective, or even what are some of the mistakes that many founders make?
I usually start with mistakes, but I'm going to challenge myself to not do that today. I think the work that we do when it works really well and they're defying the turnover odds, which is all the stuff that I am here to do. I want to help them make confident hiring decisions to hire somebody that's an expert, not a hopeful. And when they do that, even though they feel pressure and the spotlight is on, and we're in a tough market for many startup founders, for many folks in tech, that is a hard place to be, and realizing, oh, wait, I actually need help. I need to hire this really important role that's going to affect how we make revenue, how we keep revenue. And so there's a lot around that. And when they get it right, they give themselves the permission to take a breath and to follow my process, or allow them to follow a process that's not just riddled with platitudes. And so part of that is I'm a big believer of slowing down up front and really getting intentional about what is it that you need. Forget about the title, forget about whatever article or podcast or person that gave you advice, but what is your business telling you? Because I believe our businesses are the oracle of our lives when it comes to decisions that we need to make. And for the founders that slow down and not try to pressure cook it, it's like me wanting to bake a wedding cake in an air fryer. That's not going to happen, right? Maybe a little baby wedding cake. But if I have 300 people coming to a wedding and I want a 6-tiered cake, that's not happening in an air fryer. It's going to need to be in a heavy duty commercial oven. And so I really appreciate when what they do and it pays off, where they are intentional up front to understand, why am I hiring? Why this role? Why now? What is it that my business actually needs? What is it that my team needs? What is the work that's really required to do this well, and to get that Windex bottle out and get clear and intentional around what that is. So that's step one, is that intentionality and clarity. And then step two is using a hiring scorecard. I'm very outspoken on that topic. I have created my own methodology around that. I have written about it. I have free templates for people to use. It was one of the biggest mistakes of my own career, making a bad decision based on a shiny object. That happens a lot. So now I'm bringing in the mistakes. We get seduced by shiny objects. Sometimes that's money. Sometimes that's the idea of what could be versus what's actually happening. Sometimes that is the idea of, well, you told me this surface statement. It sounds really good. I want to be like that. And I don't know what you actually do because I've never done it myself and I haven't dug below the surface. And so I'm just going to stick straight up on that surface with the shiniest of objects and hope that all goes well. The scorecard is a great equalizer for that. So I'm a recovering shiny-aholic myself. And it's probably why I'm so outspoken. But when they really lean into that, that's also another great way that they defy the odds. So normally I've found without a system, without intentionality, without clarity, without a hiring scorecard, that your odds of getting it right are about 20%. And when you flip the script and lean into some of these things, and this is my own data over the last 9 years, but when you flip the script and lean into some of these things, we're seeing companies defy those odds to be over 80%.
Incredible. So we'll make sure there's a link to all of that in the show notes for people to enjoy. But what could you share a couple of those guidelines for us?
Sure. So when I think about a scorecard done well and right, it's going to be, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. So for the listeners, I'm sorry, but it is that intentionality. So I believe slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So let's talk about when you think about what success looks like for the role. Let's flash forward to 6 months from now, to a year from now, and we're celebrating what we did together. What is it? And why does it matter? And where is it coming from? And getting all of that down on paper. So I'm a huge fan of a journal. And whether you're a journaler or not, I don't care. It could be a voice note, it could be a carrier pigeon. I don't really care how you get it down, just get it down on paper. But I like looking for, one of my superpowers is looking for patterns and themes. So if I'm asking questions about what does success look like, and conversely on the other side, and a lot of the work that I do is with founders that made the wrong hire and they're reeling from those painful after effects and they don't want to repeat it. And so it's then thinking about, well, what are the lessons that we've learned, right? What's your role in it? What was their role in it? When the crack in the foundation emerged, where did it come from? Because I find that if we don't understand that, we're going to repeat the same mistake over and over again. And then let's think about our job description. So half the time, I think people take job descriptions and they just copy and paste what they can find online from their biggest competitor, slap their logo on and a few tweaks here and there and call it good. What I encourage people on the other side, candidates, to do is take that job description, pore over it, and understand their must-haves and how have you actually done that before so you can have a productive conversation to confirm or deny alignment. Well, now if I've copy and pasted that job description, it's not even really my own must-haves, and I haven't thought about where it comes from, but it sounds right. Well, now we are increasing our odds of getting it wrong. And so I'm a big fan of then taking that same approach of clarity and intentionality into the job description. So what is the actual work that's required to do this role well? What do I need right now? What do I need for the next 18 months, especially for these roles? Carta has data around if you are sub 10 million in a startup for any of the go-to-market roles around sales and marketing, your tenure is less than 2 years. So when somebody tells me, well, I want to hire somebody that's going to get me to 100 million or an IPO, the chances of that person sticking around to do that are like real low. And by the way, I've only seen and met 3 people in my entire career that went from sub 10 million to over $100 million or an exit or an IPO. It's not like that's the norm. And so I try to temper people back to reality around what do the next 2 years look like? Where is this work coming from? What do your customers want or need? Remember, I'm dealing with sales and customer success and the stuff that touches revenue or touches the customer. This would be the same for anybody listening for any role. So if we're talking about your CFO, well, do you really need a CFO or do you need a staff accountant? And by the way, I don't even know why I'm using this analogy. I'm married to a CPA for a reason. I don't know any of that. I still use my fingers to count. So for whatever reason, we're in tax season. That's probably why I don't have a husband right now. He's shackled to the taxes. So maybe that's why that's top of mind. But when I think about this, it's what's driving this. What's going to give you confidence to know that you've made a really good hire because they're doing X, Y, and Z in the role. Not what you think that they should do because you read a blog post or somebody else tells you that you should do because they have no idea what your business actually demands are. And what's interesting is I could have a coach, I could have an advisor, I could have a mentor, I could have a colleague, I could have an ex-coworker, I could have an investor or a board member that tells me this is what I need. But if they're not by my side every day, seeing what's happening in my business and they're getting the highlight reel, their opinion is valuable, but it's not the be all end all. And so that's that confidence piece of, you know, your business better than anybody else. Use that. And so all of that stuff carries weight. And then I get a highlighter out and I look for patterns and themes. So what doesn't work in a scorecard is when you have 100 different categories and you have a million bullet points in every category. How are you going to be able to effectively score that? How do you even know that that is something that's realistic? And I find it's like writing software. If you have too many and statements, you're going to spin out. You have to have some or statements in there. And that scorecard is the ability to figure that out and then thematically have the right categories listed and then to use that as your blueprint for any single person that's on the hiring committee or involved in the hiring process. We all have agreed, even if we adopt Jeff Bezos's disagree and commit, we all know what this criteria is. We've all agreed to it. We all know what our role is. We all know what the categories are that we are going to spend time on. We've all committed that we are going to take time thinking about the interviews that we have around the criteria that we've agreed to. Oh, and we've also agreed to debrief together afterwards. So you're in lockstep. There's that concept, like I said, of chucking hope out the window and getting really confident and precise. These are all the guardrails or guidelines that I think about with a scorecard.
Oh, thank you. That's so helpful because I think many of us get this wrong and it is a painful process. And in light of generosity as the theme topic of our conversation today, it's not generous to the individual that you're hiring or interviewing. It's not generous to the organization. It's not generous to the founder or the leader. So it's really like in the spirit of let's try to find a way to conduct our businesses and grow. I mean, hiring is a great signal that it's time to grow, which is exciting. And like, I love how you talked about slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
I did not create that saying. I forgot who I got it from. I don't even know where the source is, but it grabbed me and it's true. And I think, something that I should say in the spirit of generosity is one of the things that I've learned over being in and around the people industry for almost 3 decades is this. We have taught each other, the employer and the person that's considering something new that's interviewing, we've taught each other this race to the bottom. And what I mean by that is we are so focused on, I have to hire, or this person's so focused on, I want to get this offer and then I'll decide. I want to make this hire and then I'll decide. Or I want to get to the offer process and then I'll decide. And then you're really in the driver's seat of hope. Well, I hope that this is all good and then we'll figure it out later. And let me tell you what figuring it out later looks like. For the roles that I work on, if you hire the wrong sales leader, it's a multi-million-dollar problem. And it's not just what you can see and feel in their salary that you paid. It's in the time that it took to hire them in the first place. It's in how their leadership or lack thereof affected your pipeline, how it affects your team, the turnover of the team. Oh, by the way, if you've got to pay severance or you get into a legal pickle, these are all things that people don't consider. And the list goes on and on and on. And so one of the things that I think is in the spirit of generosity sharing that people need to realize is that slow is smooth and smooth is fast piece is not just in the scorecard or the job description or the hiring committee. It's also in not having a rigorous, ridiculous, you don't even know why you're asking these people to interview these people process that turns people off, but an efficient process that's riddled with intentionality that may take an extra step up front, but now we're aligned. Because if the problem is on both sides, I just want to get to the outcome. The outcome could be the offer or the hire or whatever you want to say. if that's what we've been ingrained in our brain taught to do, there is so much stuff that's lost in translation along the way. And this is the biggest problem I find that we have in the world, let alone in business, is we assume.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point that Grammarly did a study with the Harris poll last year, and it's very rare for me to be speechless, and it literally struck me like a ton of bricks.
What did it say?
I'm just going to quiz you here. What do you think the cost is in the US alone? I don't have global data, just the US alone in business. The cost of poor communication per year is in the US.
Billions, maybe even trillions. I don't know. And how would they quantify that is where my brain went. But very expensive and common.
1.2
trillion.
Yep, 1.2 trillion.
Oh my gosh.
And that the average person per week spends at least 8 hours cleaning up after poor communication. So think about that. I got your rejection letter and that super turned me off. And now I went to Glassdoor and filleted you. And now you're clamoring to try to make it right with me. Or I Slacked messaged you. This isn't even in the interview process. Like, think about all the ways that we communicate between voice note, text message, Slack, chat, email, context shifting. And half the time, people aren't being ridiculous. They're just short on time and trying to respond. But and if I took it the wrong way,
they're multitasking. Yeah.
Now extrapolate that out to the interview process, and you don't know how to interview, and maybe you do a little bit. We'll be generous there. Maybe you do a little bit, but this is a different kind of role, and you don't know how to interview for this role, and you've got somebody that you're not really sure how to exactly vet them, and they sound really great, and they're telling you, I've got 2 other offers, and if you don't make me the offer, you're going to lose me. And you are just stuck on the surface level statements and assuming that this is going to work. And you take that little baby voice inside and you shove it down where it's like, I don't know. I'm telling you, this is the number one thing why I'm in business, is I'm brought in to clean up after that mess. And the mess is catastrophic for both parties involved. It's not fun.
And it's avoidable, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
If we could be more intentional and thoughtful and that curbing our enthusiasm, we're excited to get to that next step, or we're desperate to get to that next step. And you're coaching us to say, slow down, think about it, write it down. Best case scenario, what does the business tell you that it needs? Who are the candidates that you would need to find? And how are you going to effectively and thoughtfully interview them to run them through this scorecard without making it feel like a scorecard? Because I'm sure that's another part of your coaching, is that you don't want to make it too pragmatic and feel like people are checking boxes. But that whole don't assume is where you started here. And what an important message for us to hear.
Well, and to have the courage. So I have a private group of people that I coach for all of the kind of talent or unemployed or curious or struggling in their career. I can't help everybody individually. So I have a private group, and I show up there every week to lead workshops, and we talk about a lot of different things. And what's interesting about this thematically that comes up is there is fear. And there's not just fear on the side of I'm interviewing for a new role. There's fear on the side of I'm hiring. We have found ourselves in a world where it's really hard to make a mistake, let alone perhaps impossible to make one without losing your job or major repercussion. Think about life as a founder. I've got a very active board. I took money on from the wrong investor. The pressure cooker is happening. This is my first time at this rodeo. I don't know how to make a decision. Do you think that they have safety to be able to say, I don't know? And so this is a really big thing where assumptions happen, where it's like, oh, I read this article from this person that has had 10 exits, so they know. Well, content's one thing, but if you don't have context or competency around it, good luck with that content. So what's interesting about this is that fear factor that I'm talking about is fear of asking questions, fear of saying, I'm a little murky on that. Can you help me understand? Specifically on the side of those that are interviewing, I'm afraid that if I ask a question, they'll take it away from me. I'm like, well, would you want to work with somebody that you can't ask? Like, what? Wait, what? And somehow we've landed on this sort of odd planet where I just need to figure out what the other person wants to hear. I need to sell them on myself and it'll all work out. Well, guess what? I have grown up in sales and I have a recruiting firm, and sales and recruiting are not dissimilar. And what I've learned along the way is when we merely sell something to someone else and we are not aligned, it does not
Absolutely.
work out.
Yeah. I mean, I always think about sales as probably because I think of everything through the lens of generosity, but I think about it as a generous act because you're first listening to understand what a person's need is. And then if you have something to offer them, then you do, and you do it wholeheartedly. And, you are a professional and helpful and all of those things. So if you're not wholehearted, or maybe your solution is not the right answer for the problem that you heard, then then it does go badly. Because I think for some people, they try to make their product fit into every scenario, and that's just not reality.
No. And that's a big thing that I see in the work that I do, where no amount of sales excellence or expertise can fix when you have a product that the market does not want. So correction there. But it's fascinating to me that it's like, well, I am technical. This is my company. I don't like sales. I don't understand sales. It's intimidating to me. I really care about my product and I haven't really validated that product in the market, but I'm just going to hire a sales team and a sales leader to do it for me. Well, if you don't know firsthand, nobody else can figure that out for you. Remember that Windex bottle. Here it comes again.
So you've worked with a lot of people in many different industries and companies, and some at these very tenuous, stressful stages in their career development, their business development. Where have you witnessed generosity at work? Like what are some of the ways in which you've recognized behavior that you would categorize as generous?
So, in the most unexpected place that I see it, and it delights me every single time, is when we chuck our assumptions and we keep an open mind and we're generous about considering a different point of view. Because here's the thing, you and I can disagree, Shannon, and we will. And that is A-okay. What I don't love that doesn't work, that's not generous, is when I shut you down or I stonewall you to say, fair enough, Shannon, agree to disagree. Where do we go from there? How generous is that? Instead, it's, you know what? I hear you, Shannon. I see it differently. I approach it differently, but we are in this together. And I would love to hear more about your point of view because I might be missing something. If that's not generous, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that curiosity. I mean, I always think curiosity is unfortunately so absent in a lot of communication. I think that's some of the cleanup that you were referring to earlier. We're assuming, we're not open-minded, we're not curious and wondering, like, where is your perspective coming from? And I love how in your example you shared, I might be missing something. So that humility of perhaps I'm seeing it differently or I'm missing something. That's just a very generous way to approach a disagreement. And then the conversation continues, which I think all of the great value comes after that little wall that most of us don't skillfully get past.
Well, I think we're so busy reacting and responding. And by the way, it's like a muscle that you work. It's not like you just, because you want to do it, you remember to do it all the time. You have to be very aware. And it is an intentionality thing. And I have worked on this. I haven't always gotten it right. And I have found myself feeling something that feels threatening or feels scary. And you go into wanting to defend or react or respond. And every time I've done that, it has never worked well for me. And I chose differently. And I want to choose differently. Do I get it right every single time? No, I'd be lying to every single person. And I think all of us would say that. But when I lean into that curiosity, so if I start feeling something that feels threatening, I use it as a signal and I take a pause. And instead of responding, I go into that mode of wanting to understand, because guess what? We're going to disagree. And we may end up ultimately disagreeing, but if we have to do work together or we're doing something together, I find progress is made when we understand why we're disagreeing. And if all I'm doing is, and I have a very strong personality, if I am reacting or responding or defending without understanding, I'm going to shut you down and you're going to feel like I'm yelling at you when I'm not. I'm just passionate about it. But also, I don't know your point of view. So if we have to do something together, then what am I saying? It's my way or the highway, or I'm just talking at you. And I think there's that element of like we talk at each other. And I really crave talking with each other. That's a form of care, which is a form of, it's actually a form of consideration, which is a form of care. If I consider to hear you, to understand you, even if it feels threatening or scary to me, my gosh, I wish we had more of this in the world. And never have I ever regretted leaning into that. I've always regretted when I haven't.
Yeah. And I think earlier when you were talking about your superpower of noticing patterns, and what I'm hearing you say in this piece, Amy, is that you recognize the pattern of feeling threatened. Like maybe there's something physiologically that happens or mentally, emotionally. And that's the cue. I mean, I'm just speaking from experience too, as somebody who has regretted reacting badly or being defensive. And I totally agree that I've never regretted being generous or kind or thoughtful in my response. I'm always like, wow, I just did it. I feel like I'm stronger because of that. But I think it's that recognizing the pattern of like what's going on for you. Where's your brain going? How are you feeling? And then use that as that signal to maybe breathe it out, take a break, remind yourself of something. I mean, what do you do? How do you practice?
So I have worked with my therapist with this, is understanding how am I feeling something. So if you think about it, you feel things in different parts of your body. And when you understand what that is, so patterns and themes, you can label it, right? So when I'm mad, like if you've really pissed me off, I feel like the jugular in my neck is about to burst out. Like it is pulsing. That is anger. So when I feel that, it's like, ugh. When I feel sad about something, which is also like another threatening feeling. Like, I don't want you to know that you hurt me or that I'm sad or any of that. So then that's where the defensiveness comes into play. But like, I feel that in my heart. It's like, ugh. And if it's anything that feels like fear-based or really threatening, I feel it in my gut. It's almost like a hunger feeling. And there are other, there are other feelings. So sometimes I feel it in my front part of my head where it's like, oh, I'm thinking. And I notice that when I start looking up and away, I'm visualizing it and I'm thinking about that. And so that's a different feeling, right? That's a different response. So when you're in tune with all the different ways that you feel things and you notice that it's starting to come up, I take a breath and I look for something to touch. So for example, and this sounds super hokey, but on my laptop, which is open right now, I have 2 sensory stickers. One is on the right side and it is a triangle and it says in the middle of the triangle, start breathing. And then you follow your finger and it's like, breathe in, hold, breathe out. And I will use that in the conversation just to put my finger over that to remind me to take a breath, get in tune with where is it that I'm feeling this. And if it is anything beyond my front part of my head that's like, oh, and I'm brainstorming because I'm naturally curious if I'm doing that. If it's anything else, I use that as a signal to stop myself and ask a question. And that has changed my life, really, truly. All of you are welcome. That is from years and years of my therapy. And so that is me giving you a generous gift of
that is a very, very
therapy.
generous gift. Yeah, one that all of us can use literally every day. What kind of questions do you ask?
Well, if I'm really irritated, like if it's something that's very, very threatening to me, the question could just be, can you tell me more? Because I don't always know what in the world I'm even thinking, right? I mean, it's hard to slow yourself down when you're feeling like you're going a million miles an hour. And so I think it's sometimes it's just that, or sometimes it's tell me more, or sometimes it's,
Yeah.
I actually see that differently, but I don't want to assume anything. Can you tell me more about that? Or
Mm.
where is that coming from? Or
Where's that coming from?
how
Yeah.
do you see it? Or
Mm-hmm.
is this something that affects more than you? Because sometimes people make statements because they're told and it's not their
Yeah.
thing and they're afraid that they could be in trouble or whatever the deal is. But
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep it open ended and I try to not lead the witness because that's
Mm.
when I learn. And that's when that aha moment comes into play, Shannon, where it's like, oh, I didn't even realize that was a thing. And I'm being a
Mm.
butthead right now. And
Mhm.
it's like, I'm not always right. And I mess stuff up all the time. And doing that has made me realize like, I'm just a girl trying to do something with another person. And I have the
Mhm.
best of intentions and I don't understand everything. And I need to slow it on down so that I can
Yeah.
try to understand as much as I can understand. And even though it might trigger me or pull something up that feels threatening, this person is not that person that did that to me, or it's not the situation that had that
Mm.
happen, or it's whatever the deal is. And by the way, this is life advice. This is,
Yeah.
this is
Totally. Oh my gosh,
this is for
totally.
anything, right? Let alone then it's not like just because you and I are doing a podcast and it's about work that all of a sudden I went through like some sort of magical doorway that everything else in my life goes away. You know what? I
Mhm.
still spilled my tea all over my counter this morning and I still went on a walk and stepped in dog poo this morning. Like I'm still a person that does, and those are all two
Mhm.
true things that happened to me this morning. But it's like that's stuff that happens. And I think sometimes if we just slow down and realize like we're all just trying to do the best that we can. And I find
Exactly.
that people generally and genuinely are not out to get me. It's that
Mhm.
reminder and that little sticker moment of just stopping and taking a breath and asking a question.
Mm. Ah, that is gold. Amy, thank you. That is really something that can change our lives.
Well,
And the other thing I'm hearing while you're, running your finger around that triangle and or diamond shape and breathing is self-compassion, right? I mean, like I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we feel things for a reason. It's information. Don't judge it and make it wrong. Just be curious and say, I wonder why I'm feeling like that. I wonder what that's triggering in me. Does that make sense that I feel like that? Because sometimes, like, I don't know, like I'll get hit with a wave of sadness and then I'll be like, oh, try to tamp it down and find the joy. And then sometimes I just remember to have that moment of self compassion and to say, I wonder what's causing me to feel like that. And then I'll think, something reminded me of my dog that recently passed away. And I'm like, well,
sorry.
that makes sense that I feel sad. That's very normal and healthy. So I think that self-compassion of identifying it, trying to put language around it or staying curious with it, and then being self-compassionate and acknowledging that you're human, you're on a journey, and as you're learning, that's helping you to become more of who you really are.
Well, I agree. And what I've learned is many of us have, when you really go to the root of it, like if you're doing any sort of self work, work, um, which I have done a lot of, you realize what your root causes are. And I find that many folks struggle with worthiness stuff. And um, if that's at the root, which has been at the root for some of my stuff, I would be lying if I said it wasn't. What you realize is all of this stuff is interconnected. So the things that we taught ourselves of how we coped with things or how we communicated or how we didn't communicate, um, it's not like that goes away. And it certainly doesn't go away if you don't do something about it. So, like, nothing changes unless you change it. And that interconnectedness of our worthiness or how we cope or whatever then leads into self-talk. And I can tell you right now, I would never talk to my worst mortal enemy the way that I've talked to myself at times through the years. And so it is giving, speaking of generosity, let's be generous with ourselves to say, you know what, you've got this and you are worth this. And you do know some of these things. I mean, how many times have you ever felt like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm the stupidest person in the room. And I just totally flubbed that. And I am such an idiot and da, 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 da. And then after the meeting, somebody's like, that was brilliant. And you're like, what? Like,
All the time. Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Or you asked that question that you thought was so, cringeworthy. And then people, thank God you asked that because I was wondering the same thing. And it reinforces like, go ahead and be you.
Yes.
And don't feel bad about it. Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm going to attempt to try to recap some of what we heard here today, Amy. I mean, this is like really great stuff.
Aww.
And because I want our listeners to consider what are some of the things that you share that they could practice and apply into their own lives right now. So the two key words I kept hearing show up is alignment and clarity. So just thinking about that in their own life, how aligned am I? How can I even get more clear about my purpose and my role? You talked about making confident hiring decisions and gave us some thoughts on how to do that, including be intentional, use a hiring scorecard, and that journaling your thoughts, I thought was also a really great thing. Journaling, what do you really want? What does it look like? Clarifying the job description, include the must-haves. What do you need right now? What do you need in the future? So all that clarification, the slow is smooth and smooth is fast is a key takeaway. The balance and or statements, you were talking about coding, and that was just a real aha moment for me. Like instead of just adding, let's also think about, or we could have, a couple pivot tables. Talked about debriefing together, interviewing separately and debriefing together to get that consensus, create a hiring process. Don't assume. That was a big takeaway here. Don't assume, check your assumptions, keep an open mind. You talked about how to pay attention to when we're feeling threatened, that we need to talk with each other, and the emphasis is on with, not to each other. And then you were saying about recognizing how and where we're feeling something, and then understand and seek that clarity and alignment again. And then the last bit about breathing, stop, breathe, ask a question, be curious still, be self-compassionate. So such brilliant wisdom that you have shared with us. Thank you for your time and generous energy and for giving us all of these things to consider. I so appreciate you, Amy.
Shannon, thank you.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G. Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.